emancipatory potential of art is recognized, however, not always in political field. Remembering the experience of avant-garde in 20th century, the desiring for the direct engagement in the reality had fallen into the trap of either surveillance to the party or of being subjected to the market, it is sometimes difficult to think about political dimension of emancipatory potential of art. In order to understand this emancipatory potential, which many contemporary artists are using, in the following paper I will start from the analysis of the failure of avant-garde through writings of Louis Althusser on art, who has noticed in art a discrepancy, allowing for the appearance of something radically new, not conditioned by dominating ideology, to Alain Badiou, who, following Althusser's reflections, points at responsibility of art in transformation of subjectivity within the horizon of the emancipatory change of the system. I show that roots of such perspectives are in ancient Greece, especially in Plato's rationalism. So I go like this way, and then I go that way. Ancient Greece is also reference for Richard Schusterman, who, coming from pragmatist aesthetics, has founded a field of investigation called Soma aesthetics. Emancipatory potential of art is from that point of view understood differently, as shows articles of, for example, Martin J. and Max Rynanen analyzing politically and socially engaged project and body art practices. I claim that we have to join perspective of pragmatism and structuralism while considering art, not mixing them. Pragmatist and structuralist perspectives are complementary as two sides of the same coin. This coin is art. The pragmatist side tells us about its relation with a personal, somatic, and communal experience, while the structural side tells us about its social and discursive functioning within the structure. To understand art fully, we have to see it from both sides. Failure of avant-garde emancipatory engagement on an example of Mieczysław Sztuka, avant-garde photomontage. Avant-garde art had fallen into a trap, dreaming of being close to everyday praxis, of emancipation of social classes, and of creative potential, and it started to serve communism or capitalism and consumerism. At that time, the most important figures of international constructivism, like Lisicki, Duisburg, or Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, had been trying to move from utopia to praxis, so that an abstract, geometrically organized image symbolizing an ideal order of the new world had passed away, giving place to projects of concrete realizations in the field of architecture, industrial design, typography, and so on. Stanisław Czekalski, a Polish theorist occupied with avant-garde art, especially avant-garde photography and photomontage, shows that after constructivist and surrealistic experience, photomontage had been subdued to politics or absorbed into a mass culture. Czekalski refers him to Polish, Soviet, English, and German examples like Sztuka, Daszewski, Temerson, Hoch, Grosz, Hirschfeld. For example, Mieczysław Sztuka, the only Polish constructivist who used the technique of photomontage, ended up elaborating instruments of visual political propaganda. Before he tried to break the distance with an audience, be more accessible for mass viewer and more communicative than an abstract image. Tracing an artistic development of Sztuka, one can see that in 20th century, he was dedicated to constructivism, geometry, technical and industrial order. A belief in processes of rationalization, technicization, industrialization, geometrization, and the idea of never-ending development was moving him, as it was also explicit in writings of Fernand Léger, Le Corbusier, and Lisicki. Léger was writing about dependence of machine and industrial creativity on geometry because he was treating geometric form as dominant and infiltrating all areas with visual and psychological influence. The rules of rationalization facilitation supposed to lead to more equal, more democratic world where there would be houses for everybody and a good quality of life, allowing also masses of proletariat to enjoy art after other basic needs have been fulfilled. Le Corbusier wanted to create serial architecture accessible economically for the working class, who was supposed to solve social problems and relieve tensions appearing on their basis. However, the practical drive, a desire to be understandable and useful for a society, started to be stronger from the will to experiment formally, and art started either to serve particular political interests or to serve mass culture and consumption. Stanisław Czekalski, in his analysis of avant-garde photomontage, which he argues to be in the mere core of avant-garde, claims that this failure had occurred because of avant-garde artists' belief in processes of rationalization and industrialization as leading to more just, equal, democratic world in which people would have time and strength to appraise the beauty. Their desire to be socially useful and to cross the border between life and art was misled by either a party or a market. Louis Althusser on the relation between art and ideology. This disappointment with avant-garde can be interpreted in an Althusserian term, because art, as other spheres of life, is related to ideology. Althusser states clearly in his letter on art in reply to André Desprez from the year 1968 that he does, quote, not rank real art among the ideologies, although art does have a quite particular and specific relationship with an ideology, unquote. This relation is coming from that art shows ideology. It makes it visible, consciously or not being an ideology itself, what constitutes essential difference between art and ideology. Quote, what art makes us see and therefore gives to us in the form of seeing, perceiving, and feeling, which is not the form of knowing, is the ideology from which it is born, in which it baths, from which it detaches itself as art, and to which it alludes, unquote. Althusser, writing on novels of Balzac and Tolstoy, and trying to understand how it is possible that being written by bourgeois writers, they have as internal part a certain distance to what they present, asks, quote, how is it that Balzac, despite his personal political option, makes us see the lived experience of capitalist society in a critical form, unquote. Althusser states that, quote, it is an effect of their art as novelists that it produces the distance inside the ideology what makes us perceive it, unquote. Art for Althusser does not occupy itself with a different kind of reality, but with the only one that we have, although in a specific way different from scientific one. This gives possibility of appearance in work of art of internal distance towards the reality, the distance that allows critical perception of status quo and thought on the new. It is not that, as André Desprez puts it, that art has its own logic, which made Balzac abandon his political conceptions, what Althusser criticizes in Desprez' point of view expressed in his letter sent to Althusser by La Nouvelle Critique. Then Althusserian terms allows us to both understand relation between ideology and art, and to notice the possibility of emancipation from the structure. They let us think seriously about political potential of art in emancipatory context. Art is a sphere which is possible to obtain the distance to the structure and to think of something radically new. It has a strength to free, to emancipate us from status quo. Without art, we are closed in unfinished repetition and reproduction of structural blocks. Within each block, there is a possibility of change of that sort that lower layer after revolt can take place of upper layer. However, there is no real change in the structure. There is only an exchange in the place of the matter being subjected to the structure. There is a need of the knowledge of art that breaks with this what is given and with the concepts of spontaneity supposedly free from ideology, about which rise Althusser's, that, quote, the knowledge of art presupposes a preliminary rupture with the language of ideological spontaneity and the constitution of a body of scientific concepts to replace it, unquote. Alain Badiou on art and philosophy. This way of reading Althusser is undertaken today by Alain Badiou, who points at the responsibility of art in transformation of subjectivity within the horizon of the emancipatory change of the system. However, he also recognizes that emancipation art, freedom or liberty, is something more than its democratic and liberal version. It strives further on than the common democratic definition of freedom. In the last thesis from his 15th thesis on contemporary art, he points at correlation between artistic creation and liberty, and states that in art, in artistic creations, there appears, quote, a new form of liberty, a new form of freedom, unquote, and then you quote, something like a new beginning, a new possibility, rupture, and finally something like a new world, a new light, a new galaxy, unquote. Here we find, as in Althusser's thought, a rupture, something that is breaking with the given. This understanding of art by Badiou grows on the ancient Greek ground and has its roots in Plato's reflection on art, though Badiou is conscious that he reads Plato against Plato, and that his reading is based on the paradox present in Plato's thought. This paradox is that on the one side, especially in the 10th book of Republic, Plato bans many types of art from the Republic, sparing only military poetry and patriotic songs, and on the other, he practices his philosophy in artistic form, in dialogue form close to the theater. The paradox present in Plato's thought and pointed by Badiou has not just aesthetic character in this superficial sense in which we often think of aesthetics. It has a deep philosophical meaning. Philosopher governing the Republic should be suspicious to art because art gives us very intensive pleasure which does not have only aesthetical dimensions, but creates possibility for transformation of subjectivity. Here we can observe a phenomenon of mimesis, active not on the level of imitation of what is seen, but a step further, on the level of our identification with a representation, and with certain beliefs on the reality. It is explicit that aesthetic pleasure is the one side, while the other is activity in public sphere and a form of subjects active in the sphere. Philosophy and art are performative, and as philosophy changes a subject with the rational means and forms it according to the rules of reason, art also can change subjectivity, creating representations of subjective identity, which will have strong influence on public opinion, on big parts of society, and also on a system of our beliefs and on the world and on ourselves. However, its way of influence is not only rational. Art acts also through emotions and senses, and so a subjectivity which it can show us can have diametrically a different character than individual rational subject presented by traditional philosophy. Turning back to ancient times, Badiou contrasts Aristotelian and Platonian point of view on art, showing that art in Plato's thought, being considered as related to knowledge, is a possible part of philosophy with a big importance and influence, while for Aristotle, art has no relation with knowledge and, quote, its essence is mimetic and its regime is that of semblance, unquote. Then for Aristotle, art has rather therapeutic function due to an importance of an effect of catharsis than political and epistemological importance. This is also the reason why Badiou refers himself sometimes to the knowledge and the art with the Lacanian notion as to the master and hysteria, However, he is no place to develop this comparison. For Badiou, art produces a special, its own truth, and it is one of the four procedures of truth that he recognizes: art, science, politics, and law. The truth can be understood as a certain way of perceiving, understanding, and doing things, and not as a knowledge, being an organized institutional structure of information. The truth in art is very similar, and because of that, a quote, inscribed in the imagery, unquote, an experience individually, emotionally, and somatically. Relating art, psychoanalysis, and Aristotle, Badiou also touches the emancipatory potential of art, though not from explicitly political point of view. For this reason, Plato serves Badiou well enough, but from individual somatical experience personally. Doing so, he inscribes himself in a long and stable tradition of considering art as freeing emotions on the basis of the thought of Aristotle on theater. In last decades, this path is also taken up by Richard Schusterman in both his pragmatic aesthetics and in semi-aesthetics. Schusterman, Body and Aesthetics. Proclaiming in the year 1999 the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism semi-aesthetics as a disciplinary proposal, Schusterman referred himself to Socrates, Aristippus, founder of the Cyrenaic school, Zeno, founder of the Stoicism, and Diogenes, as examples of philosophers connecting the well-being of the body with the intellectual and emotional well-being, as Aristippus insisted, quote, that bodily training contributes to the acquisition of virtue, unquote. Zeno, quote, urged bodily exercise, claiming that proper care of health and one's organ of sense are unconditional duties, unquote. And Diogenes the Cynic, quote, was advocating for bodily training as essential for sensory knowledge and discipline that wisdom and the good life demanded, unquote. Although these ancient Greek examples are not the only ones of such a posture treating the human body as an important part of our intellectual and emotional life, as Schusterman indicates, also Asian practices of Hatha Yoga, Zen meditation, and Tai Chi Chuan, which are somatic trainings recognized as an essential means towards philosophical enlightenment. Body and somatic experience is very important for Schusterman. Even before the idea of semi-aesthetics, when he was working within pragmatist aesthetics, the most important was holistic experience of art, allowing him to trespass the border between elite or high art and popular art. Referring himself to John Dewey, Schusterman advocated for considering art as a specific, enriching kind of human experience, which not necessarily has to be connected to a certain object, work of art. From this point of view, art is freed from conceptual constraints and can be experienced freely. It goes along with Dewey, who, in his late book dedicated to art, does not present any precise definition of art, but he presents it as a certain quality infiltrating our experience, as a way in which the work forms an experience and is present in it. To explain the meaning of predicate aesthetics, he writes that the one has to occupy oneself with events and images on which eye and ear fixes human attention, which wake up his interest and give him a satisfaction when he watches and listens. It is unluckily my humble translation from Polish translation because I don't have yet English version of Art and Experience. I know it quite well in Polish version. Then connecting closely body and art in terms of experience, Dewey shows us a possibility to think emancipation, though the experience in Dewey's thought is not unconditioned, but oppositely, defined by social, historical, and cultural background. The new comes here always from the practice, from an individual and his/her personal experience in a specific context. There is no one right way of experiencing, and each event of experience brings the new, which has also its somatical, psychological, emotional, intellectual level. Thus, it cannot be foreseen, it may only be experienced. Then Schusterman turns to art being concentrated on it as on experience, having also its somatic characteristic. This can be understood from the point of view A, but also from the point of view of Schusterman references to Alexander Baumgarten and to the Asian concept of aesthetics. These references are extremely important, as on them the proposal of Soma aesthetics is based. The first one aiming at the revival of, quote, Baumgarten's idea of aesthetics as a life-improving cognitive discipline that extends far beyond questions of, on beauty and fine arts, and that involves both theory and practical exercise, unquote, based on ancient Greek term aesthesis, sensory perception, and the second criticizing the neglection of body introduced into aesthetics. However, doing so, Schusterman gives as examples forms of psychosomatic therapies as Alexander Technique, the Feldenkrais method, bioenergetics, dietary and bodybuilding practices. Remembering great analysis of rap music presented by Schusterman in Pragmatist Aesthetic Living Art Rethinking Beauty, we can understand the contemporary discussion taking place on Schusterman ideas. This discussion shows that there is a need for some aesthetics to turn to highbrow art and to art understood as political practice, and not to concentrate only on popular art and different somatic phenomena from bodybuilding through meditation to drug abuse. New artistic subjects of investigation for Soma aesthetics. In the newest issue of the Journal of Soma Aesthetics, winter 2015, Max Rynanen, in article Throwing the Body into the Fight, the Body as an Instrument of Political Art, tries to, quote, bridge Soma aesthetics to one of the major trends in contemporary art, the practice of political and social work, unquote. He does that referring to article of Martin J., Soma Aesthetics and Democracy, UN and Contemporary Body Art, published in the year 2002 in Journal of Aesthetic Education, where he criticizes analysis of rap music, the kind of analysis that had done Schusterman in famous pragmatist aesthetics, and claims that body art should become an object of discussion in Soma aesthetics. Jay's attack on rap music come out of perceiving it as totally misogynic and homophobic, although, as Max Rynanen points, he does not notice also ambiguous situation in the field of highbrow art, as it is, for example, I don't know, I'm quoting, in New York with, then quote, the unequal bourgeois and capitalistic logic of greedy collectors, the posh Fifth Avenue galleries, and the conservative bourgeois culture supporting the high art, unquote. For this reason, Rynanen does not agree with Jay's attack on rap as subject of Soma aesthetics, but agrees that there should be a place for analysis of highbrow art. From this kind of art, he recalls for politically and socially engaged artists who were and are embodying new types of relation with different parts and moments of our world. For, quote, the artist and his/her body is not just to make a difference in the society, but to concretize the political idea and spirit in our minds, unquote. Doing so, he refers to two social artistic actions, the one of Swiss Afro-European artist Sascha Huber, who climbed the Alpine peak to drag the new flag on the top of the top with the name of Congolese-born slave Renti, then transforming Agassiz horn to Renti horn. And the second of Mina Heikinaho, who was offering free breakfast for strangers in her gallery Push Firma Beige in Helsinki. Emancipatory potential of art. Rynanen notices emancipatory potential of experience of art and states explicitly his belief quote, that the role of art and philosophy is not just to exhibit and analyze, but to change society, unquote, being conscious that this possibility of thinking has been opened by John Dewey, Joseph Kupfer, Arnold Berland, and Richard Schusterman. This tradition of pragmatist philosophy is being opposed by him with the French tradition of Michel Foucault, Georges Bataille, and Gilles Deleuze. As Schusterman himself writes that some aesthetics provides, quote, precisely a critique and an alternative to such philosophies that reduce the value of somatic experience to irrational extremes of passions and pleasures, unquote. I do not agree here that French tradition, in which should be mentioned also Louis Althusser, Jacques Lacan, Ferdinand de Saussure, Pierre Bourdieu, Roland Barthes, Jacques Rancière, Alain Badiou, and many others, should be overlooked in case of considering art. The importance of somatic, perceptual, social, communal experience of art, which is underlined from the pragmatist side, does not exclude the importance of structural, discursive, linguistic, and mathematical analysis of art and its function. It was also yesterday shown by Schusterman when he was showing how, what are the similarities between Bourdieu thought and pragmatism. So it is something, this is that I'm missing Schusterman because he has enriched my thought, but I would like to discuss it further on. Both perspectives underlines a certain power present in art, the power of influence and change exerted on the forms of subjectivity, common beliefs, worldview, social and political relations. To understand that fully this power, I claim that we have to join perspective of pragmatism and structuralism, not mixing them. Pragmatist and structuralist perspective have in common trespassing fixed borders and limits of concepts, thoughts and fields, and should be read together as complementary, as two sides of one coin. This coin is the art. The pragmatist side tells us about its relation with personal, somatic, and communal experience, while the structural side tells us about its social and discursive functioning within the structure. To understand art fully, we have to see it from both sides. Two sides of the one coin, structuralism and pragmatism. Pragmatism, talking on art, can be in a certain way, I don't know if you agree, it is my proposal, can be referred to Plato's and Aristotle's definition of art, a reflection on art. Plato's ban on art was based on noticing its epistemological and political influence, while Aristotle was analyzing ways of influencing the mind and the body with art, especially theater and poetry. Them both are needed to perceive art from both, from its political external side and from its individual internal side. Ratio and soma are needed to understand art and its emancipatory potential. Ratio tells us that theater in Plato's tradition is treated as political, ideological activity. Not so old examples and great examples here are works of Bertolt Brecht, like opera for Three Pennies, Some Other Courage and Her Children, and others. Soma leads comes from Aristotelian tradition of treating theater performance as a form of therapy due to effect of catharsis, excuse me, I have lost myself in the sentence. Soma leads from Aristotelian tradition of treating theater performance as a form of therapy due to an effect of catharsis to Richard Schusterman examples of psychosomatic therapies like Feldenkrais method or Alexander technique. Perceiving art from these two sides shows explicitly emancipatory potential of art on political, structural, discursive level and on personal, somatic, individual level. Art can change lives, ways of experiencing, thinking, social, family, and political relations. The great power, however, calls for the great responsibility of art. How to make art today? This is a question too broad to try to answer to it in this article. However, I would like to refer at the end here to Alain Badiou, who states that it is necessary to occupy oneself with the discontinuities and contradictions which we feel both in the external world and foremost in the subject, himself or herself. Because there is a power in paradoxality of the subject, and this paradoxality should be shown by art. Acceptance of paradoxality allows to solve contradictions without annihilating them. Then, the aim of art and philosophy is creation of new ways of presenting the impossibility. This, what is sublime, unknown, irreducible, unspoken, unthought, this what trespasses the discourse, existing social forms and forms of presentation. Thank you.
So let's have some discussion and then maybe we'll take a 5-minute break or something like that?
Yeah, that sounds
Does that sound rational? Yeah.
I appreciated very much your focusing the emancipatory power of art. However, I have a big problem. Maybe it is only my problem, but I would like to know which is your opinion. That is, what about the so-called Greek art bubble? That is, what about the deep anti-emancipatory exploitation of art by the economic and above all financial market? Have we to consider this kind of phenomenon as a mere exterior one to let to sociologists to be studied, or have we to consider to take it into account from a philosophical point of view by asking ourselves if there are some connections between our concept of art and the exploitation, the regressive direction that it can assume?
It is a very good question, and I was, although I was looking, I had like my personal answer for years. I was very happy to find this letter that I'm referring to of Alcaraz, because for me this gives an answer. Generally, this exploitation of art in sake of reproduction of status quo, of reproduction of the system, is well known. And in Algerian terms, we can talk about art serving here within ideological state apparatuses, and it is helping to reproduce the status quo. But there I claim, and I agree with Alcaraz, it is just one letter on art that he has committed, you know, the one to André Desprez in '68, that there is a place, this discrepancy, something in, not in all art, but in some really great works of art that allows to make the difference. To make the difference. Of course, it can be like reappropriated. We can see Mondrian use as Mondrian paintings as model for design for cellular covers or stuff like that, you know. But this is something. I think that this is already something else, because it is aestheticization of commodities that surrounds us. But and I wouldn't treat Mondrian as a design on cellular phone. I would treat it as a piece of art. So I claim that there is a possibility of appearance of a new in art, although in most of its history, in most of its production, it serves to church, to aristocracy, you know, to the market, you know, to the dominating ideology. But I don't know if you agree. It is my conviction that there is a place allowing for the new. And when you take, for example, Alcaraz again, there's his conception of structural blocks where there can be revolution, but this revolution changes nothing. Changes just, you know, this that were down, you know, up, and the structure goes up. And there is like, it is like a circle that you cannot go out. And Alain Badiou, pointing at this letter, and also Bruno Bostel's one Spanish Dutch I don't know living here in the States reader of Alain Badiou points at it that in this letter Althusser shows the place where the new can appear.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, also thank you for this very interesting presentation. And of course, this is the big problem because we intuitively feel that art has a massive potential, but it is very difficult to say why. What make, I mean, how it is that looking at the pictures, icons and so on provoke us to the social action? Yeah? What is the mechanism? What is involved in this? And of course I like your comparison between Althusser and pragmatism, but I am afraid that it is very difficult in fact to say about this because there is a problem. For me, there is a problem because Althusser is a structure, and Dewey is experience. So I would, but I don't know if it is possible just to have structure and to have experience, and then to say that structure is important, experience. Of course, both are important, but of course there is a problem also how to integrate them with each other. So if I look at this problem, I would probably prefer to start with experience, with visible. So I just trying to find a circle of people who could be or could give us answer to this question, and then I see that let's say J, these scopic regimes. Rancière, he in this downcast eye presents this concept, scopic regimes. And then Rancière. I think that Rancière is extremely important here. Of course, you know that he was the rioting student of Althusser, who break with Althusser because of this Althusser's rejecting of spontaneity. And then I would say, of course, the main category of Rancière is distribution of the sensible. So I would look at art, and then it would be probably possible to integrate Rancière, Jay, Schusterman, and Dewey, like regimes of experience. Yeah, because we should also look at the experience as a kind of social phenomenon, not only just spontaneous phenomenon. Arnold spoke eloquently about sensibility, and then we have looked also kind of a regimes of distribution of sensible. So I would start with the visible, I would say, and then I also encourage you to look at the Polish Strzemiński. I think that he would be. I mean, of course, he's not so known as he should be. He was the avant-garde artist and theoretician who wrote a book, Theory of Vision, of vision, trying,
ways of seeing.
Yeah, trying to show that there is a kind of a social construction of vision from the antiquity. It was in 30s, so it was a very, very interesting. So I am not sure, I mean, with this, of course, Althusser is like the impulse, but maybe we should go further.
Maybe I will reply shortly. Thank you very much. To say truth, it is like my first trial to bring together this perspective that I have both in heart. Before I was doing or one or the other. So it is like the first time that I'm trying to bring this together. And yes, I totally agree that Rancière and Strzemiński would be here good ways to connect. To say truth, Rancière and Badiou were both pupils of Althusser's, and they don't speak at all together, you know, because they went other directions. But yes, this distribution of sensible and transformation of sensibility is very important, as I'm not only thinking about this, how does art inspire us to social action, but how does, firstly, and most importantly for me, it is how does art transform subjectivity, and so we act differently.
Exactly.
Can I say something, since I was referred to in Leszek's comment, as my paper was kind of brushed aside, and it's because I really think Rancière is exactly what I really think is wrong with thinking about art as an active force in our world. He's a theoretician that is caught in ideologies, and that is really what I was working when I was talking about how the humanist positions on democracy and art and so many things that were pushed into critical theory have failed us over and over and over again. And when we go back to the classical pragmatists and reread John Dewey and art as experience, then we come to a sense of community that's not like talking about contradictions and difference and paradoxes as things that bring us together. Maybe you can carve out a communicative praxis built on difference, but at one point you've got to have a sense of wholeness. And so Rancière to me is someone that deals in ideologies.
Joe?
I enjoyed your account very much. And I'm puzzled in a way in which Leszek and others have been. I start with a couple of images. I think of Adorno deciding that jazz was commercially infected in some way that made it ineligible for some kind of liberation, let us say. Whereas I think most of us, without thinking of it argumentatively, have found that kind of range which was brought into our experience as liberating in some uncontroversial sense. Then I think of Marx's wondering about classic art. Why does the damn thing continue to interest us when its innovation is already superseded? For example, the obvious sense in which Zento fixed on Warhol as introducing something which really quite radically confused the expressionists who went before. They were completely disorganized by the success of Warhol's obvious innovation. And what I find myself coming to is that, and also I might add, Tom Kuhn's very interesting point that progress in science, and I think could be generalized, is more or less capable of being gauged only relative to some point of view which happens to have, say, surfaced at one period or another. He actually examined the question of, could there be a discussion of progress which was not deeply contextualized in this way with respect to competing ideologies, as has been said, or doctrines, or conceptions of visions. I'm honestly myself inclined to think that there can't be a kind of single way of gauging all of this, and that there doesn't seem to be a way of diffusing these claims from counterclaims that they are, so to say, feathering their own nest, that we are the leaders of this or that, and often there's a discrepancy that there may be a gain along one scale and a kind of regress for another. I think that's his point that you said interestingly, which is in a way Hegel's point also, you have to begin with the visual, in a sense, because so much of the new has diminished the role of the visual in, let us say, painting as an art. It becomes intellectualized in some way, and then the judgment seems to be self-confirming. And so if you get opponents from another point of view, they say, well, you're the idiot, I'm not. And there doesn't seem to be any way to decide this matter. Certainly, let's say, take another kind of case, Schoenberg's introduction of his kind of scale didn't ensure that the work that would be new in that way would be interesting artistically. Turned out that there were interesting achievements, but it wasn't a function of the innovation merely. In fact, it turned out to be more difficult to produce interesting art in those terms, and there were some musicians who did very well. So the question I'd like to press is there some way of, what shall I say, quantifying, in a loose sense, quantifying emancipation or progress or freedom in some way that would allow us to decide, was Rancière really moving increasingly in the direction of greater liberation? I mean, I applaud his notion of bringing in his first efforts to bring in the taste of the working classes, as he sort of put it. But after a while, this began to yield to a need for a kind of more general account, which took in the whole sweep of art. And there, I think, this notion ideologically remained in place, but it didn't have the same kind of function that it seemed to have initially.
Judith has threatened to disrupt us.
I threaten to be disruptive if I don't get to give my example, so I hope you'll let me give my example. Is this okay with you, Aleksandra?
Would you sing otherwise?
This time I need to use my hands. So when we go to the Metropolitan Museum tomorrow, please try to find time in a small room that's dedicated to art, both of Africa and the Americas, other than North America, for this amazing, shimmering curtain that's about as large as that wall. Made, it seems to be, you think, wow, is this silk? Is this gold? What is this? It's made out of these soda can pop lids, you know, that cover the hole. And this is the work of an artist. I think he's from Mexico. He's certainly from Central America. And what he has done is both to problematize this consumerism in our culture and to put it in what Attila would like, because it's an environmental perspective, thinking about the ways in which this practice, which for most people is just unthinking. First of all, they buy the stuff in this form, and then they just throw this stuff on the ground or into the water in ways that's so damaging for other wild creatures and for the quality of the soil and the water. And they don't see either what it means or its beauty. And yet here's the paradoxical thing that makes it seem to me an example of contemporary critical art of the kind that you wanted to focus our attention on rather than the theory. The whole thing is he doesn't answer some question about where we are in a historical process of emancipation. He doesn't give us a theory about how we should do this. What he does is to present us with a problem at a level of felt experience that combines a feeling of attraction and beauty with a feeling of disgust and worry when we interpret it in terms of what this stuff is. And at the same time, this is now my response, when we look at this, when I look at this, I feel hope that such powerful work in art that problematizes consumerism and our unthinking relationship with the larger whole of nature in which we participate can be made beautiful as a lure and as a kind of ideal indicator of a direction toward which we, in our living cultural practices, should try to progress. What do you think?
I think that it is really a great example. A really great example because this is the type of art that I'm thinking about. This critical art. I don't believe in emancipatory potential of realism. I don't believe in its transparency. But to change our sensibility, change this distribution of the sensible, like talks around here, to change us, to change our thinking, but to change us deeply somatically, we need this kind of things that influences us holistically, because they influence us holistically. And yes, it is. I want also to just like shortly also to refer. Just I know that I have no time, but all your comments are so much enriching. And yes, I want to combine structure and experience, as I was talking in a long talk with Attila, because if you want to make some change, you cannot just think structurally. You have to think about this. What is this structure about? You have to think about the body. You have to think about the mind, about the whole. This. I love this holistic attitude of pragmatism that allows not to divide us into certain parts, but to treat us as a whole. So we have to think about the experience, individual experience that is transformative for us in the way that we are, we perceive ourselves, the world, and the way that we feel, and on the structure, because these two things interfere. There is some inference. So I'm so happy about your comments. Thank you. I will.
Take back.